FANSPLAINED, a media criticism podcast with Ryan and Em. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Em.
In this episode, we're continuing our deep dive exploration series into the MCU with Thor: The Dark World. This is our second entry into Phase 2 of the MCU, and follows, or is at least parallel to, part of, Iron Man 3 in the chronology. Thor: The Dark World was released in November of 2013 and is the 8th release into the MCU, and this is really where the Marvel house style, which is basically how the majority of things will look and feel in tone, comes into stark reality. No pun intended. Maybe a little bit intended. So,
basically, we are done with things looking all bright and colorful like they did in Phase 1 with a few exceptions, but for the most part, those sweet summer child days are over.
Up until way later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the existence of this production was not actually a guarantee, and it hinged very heavily on Thor's success in 2011. Marvel would talk about the sequel. Branagh didn't really feel like it was a certainty, but then Marvel would come to announce it officially that they were working on a sequel. So he's like, well, I guess it's official because Marvel said so. So Marvel felt more certain about it than Branagh had, the latter assuming it must be a certainty once formally announced. Of course, we've also seen from these modern announcement events for the MCU or even Disney that this is not at all always the case. They will announce many things that either take them years and years and years to do, fall off production, become different entirely to the thing that they announced. These things are not set in stone when Marvel announces them, but this is still the sweet summer child days of Marvel said it, so they must have been making it, rather than, here's our entire slate of the next 6 years of films. This'll definitely change in the future, but we're not going to tell you that because we want to hype you up for all of these things we just created logos for.
Pretty much.
That said, Branagh cannot commit to the intense production of Thor 2. Allegedly, and I'm saying this because I don't know for certain, this may also be closer to creative differences than something cut and dry, because there have been a lot of people citing, quote, creative differences with Marvel and this film in particular.
This film's like notorious for that.
Yeah, so we'll see a large creative shift between Thor and The Dark World. This is one of the first MCU films, on the other hand, to be handled by Marvel and Disney independently, not independent of each other, just independent from other third parties.
Like Paramount.
Yeah, so they're not tied down by negotiations with a third-party studio to distribute it or to fund it, or dealing with Sony like they have to with Spider-Man. That said, it also has its fair share of creative issues that make up for this. Notably by the directing and the writing beling the bulk of the snafus with this movie.
I'm just gonna keep going, because it's like, there's not a lot much more to say.
Snap into the microphone.
Because it's just so apparent when you watch it.
This film is basically, and I'll get to this in a minute, but this film is basically the epitome of too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yes.
That's really what the problem is, other than the fact that you're shifting people in charge of it all the time.
And you're basically taking the whole vision of Thor into a new direction when the vision established with it suited it just fine.
Yeah, which is funny because when they go on about all these people that they hired to take over from Branagh, like, they're always like, well, but we wanted to make it dark and grittier and wanted to make Asgard dirty, and it's like, but why did we need to?
Yeah, why
was
did you need
fine.
to?
I don't need Asgard to look super DCEU gritty and realistic, okay? Like, it's Asgard, gods live there, it can be pristine and shiny and whatever. I don't care.
Like, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but Taika Waititi basically kept Asgard looking as nice as it should be, and still managed to alter the tone of it without sacrificing any of what made Thor Thor.
Yeah, it's one of those where and we've seen this with other films. We won't get too into this, but there is a very notable franchise also owned by Disney that is notorious in one of its trilogies for just having directors make decisions to snipe at the one before them.
Mm-hmm.
Or one of them had a vision, the first one didn't really. They just wanted to make a movie that wasn't the one that everyone hated prior to that. And then that creative vision started getting taken out, and then the old director came back and just shat on the movie ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
I know I may be too early to be using, you know what, it's fine. It's fine. But it's definitely one of those where, like, some of when they talk about how, like, they wanted to change it from the way Branagh had done it, it feels like they're talking about these changes as if they're things that made the first Thor fail, when it didn't really. Like, it was received fine, the film did fine, it wasn't a flop, it wasn't a failure, obviously, because they made a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to talk about it in this very, well, Branagh's not gone, so we can, you know, shit all over it, and then find a reason for departing from this that makes it feel like we wanted to do that all along, when that is not at all what they wanted to do. Yeah, it basically,
the whole tone of Thor the Dark World really feels very reminiscent to being like, oh, well, you know, the previous movie sucked, so we're gonna make it better. We're gonna improve on it. When the thing is that there wasn't really any need to improve on it. It was already good.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some things that this film tries to do, quote unquote, better.
And it
to
fails.
Excess.
And it fails.
And there's some things that it tries to do that it cuts straight out of the movie. And the Thor films, even with the first one, but less so than this one is one of those where, like, when I bought this, I really loved this movie. Or I loved the potential in this movie. I was here for Zachary Levi, and that was really the only reason I was here for this movie. Fair. Fine. Whatever. But I went into this, I saw it probably more than I've seen most MCU movies, with the exception of maybe Guardians of the Galaxy. And, like, oh God, where was I going with this? I forgot where I was going. No, I forgot. Thank you, ADHD.
Where
was I going with this?
You bought this movie and you've watched it.
Oh, right. So, like, I bought this movie with, and, like, watched all the deleted scenes, because that's one of the main reasons I buy all of Marvel on Blu-rays, so that you get the features, because you don't on the DVDs.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here watching all of the deleted scenes, and I'm like, why wasn't this in the movie? Why wasn't this in the movie? Why wasn't this in the movie? They used to go on with the marketing for this film like it was, they showed us the heart of Asgard. I would like to know where that was if it wasn't on the cutting room floor.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm pretty sure that's where it is.
Which makes no sense, really.
They cut out all the stuff to do with Asgard. They cut out all the stuff to do with Jane's science. Like, it just, there are parts of it that just feel so hollow. And then there are other things they do to just absolute excess, like Darcy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, Thor the Dark World was directed by Alan Taylor, but the road to Taylor's involvement was an incredibly rocky one. So first, Branagh's departure is an event to contend with. We've covered that. Initially in talks to follow was Brian Kirk, due to some previous work on some episodes of Game of Thrones. This fell through. They couldn't even really get through negotiations, so that didn't happen. And in the wake of that falling through, Marvel hired director Patty Jenkins. And what we know Patty Jenkins primarily for, at least in the realm of superhero movies, is Wonder Woman. She's done a bunch of other stuff, but Wonder Woman is really the thing we're going to focus on here.
Prior to her getting Wonder Woman, when I heard that name, I knew that she was going to be a good choice for Wonder Woman, because I had seen Monster.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that she knew how to handle movies that tackled darker themes, or just, you know, women in general.
I would be really interested to see if Patty Jenkins' version had Sif written the same way that she was here. Because, oof.
Yeah. There's a lot of writing that just feels like it undermines these characters, or it
Odin in particular, what the fuck?
It does a major disservice to their characterization.
We'll get to that in a minute, because we're not even to writing. The directing is
a mess.
Absolute mess in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So, Jenkins unfortunately had a different story in mind for the Dark World than what had been concepted and basically storyboarded back in 2011.
Yes.
She originally wanted to go with something more akin to a Romeo and Juliet situation with Thor and Jane, where Thor was forbidden to go to Midgard, Jane was stuck on Earth, and Malekith, who is the villain in this film for those who are uninitiated, knew that Odin didn't really care about Earth that much, which is why he specifically hid the ether there. It wasn't done by Odin's father in a very questionable method of burying it so deep no one will ever find it, and it's in the top level of a fucking warehouse in London.
Yeah. That's not burying shit.
Sounds like they buried it.
That's not burying shit, bro.
Sure. So Thor was forbidden to go back to Midgard, and has been hiding the ether on Earth due to Odin's well-known disdain, or at least a best light disregard. Thor would have defied his father and made his way to Midgard regardless, and thus the conflict ensues. Which makes a hell of a lot more sense than how we did this.
Also sounds like it would have been a better romance overall, too.
It makes more sense for why Thor hasn't gone back to Earth, because clearly he can. He did for the Avengers. Mm-hmm. So clearly somebody figured it out. It makes more sense for Malekith, rather than having, like, the Asgardians hold the idiot ball the whole movie.
And drop the idiot ball several times.
You give the idiot ball to Odin, of all people, and I'm just mystified as to what happened here, because Odin should be the one person here who's not fucking stupid.
Not only that, but his whole characterization just changed.
It's wild.
The first movie.
It's wild. So Jenkins left the project after 2 months of her being announced as the director. This was back in, like, December of 2011, I guess. Stating that she wasn't the right director for the movie that Marvel wanted to make. She could make a good Thor movie, but this wasn't the one for her, and she'd be open to talks with Marvel in the future. Where this sits with her involvement in the DCEU, we don't know, though James Gunn has done both now, and whatever.
She's working with Disney to do Rogue Squadron now.
And that one's been kind of shelved, but not, so we don't know.
No.
But there's a lot of contention about what was involved with Patty Jenkins leaving. There are alleged rumors that she did not depart, she was fired. There's accusations that it was gender motivated. There are, there's a whole hubbub about why she left and how she left. We don't know either way. We do know that Natalie Portman was extremely mad that this happened. There is a reason why we have not seen Jane since this movie, up until Taika includes her in the one coming out later this year.
Which I think he basically had to do a lot of, I think the only reason he was able to get her to come back was because of what he's doing with the movie.
I think so too. I agree. Because Natalie Portman has not been in anything in Marvel since this movie, and there's a reason for that. Like, she was very vocal about her irritation that Patty Jenkins was leaving the project, but she was contractually obligated to stay.
And then we see what they basically did with Jane in the movie, and honestly,
every time they mention her afterward, like, it's...
And going back and rewatching this, I can't really blame her for being pissed off and not wanting to return for another one.
I still don't understand what happened to Jane's character whatsoever. I really don't. Like, her science-y stuff isn't there. They have Darcy doing more of it, which still doesn't make sense to me, and it will not ever make sense to me. I don't care how WandaVision explains it to me later. Does not make sense.
WandaVision trying to explain it makes even less sense.
Whatever. Anyway, so Jenkins left. So in the wake of her departure, Alan Taylor was hired. The citation for this was to give Asgard some gritty dirty reality to, quote, Game of Thrones it up. Because that's definitely what we needed. In fact, Taylor's other work does indeed include several episodes of Game of Thrones. He did the 2 finale episodes of Season 1.
Oh.
To be fair, it's the best part of Season 1.
Those are really good
Ned's
episodes.
dead.
Don't, shh.
Oh, come on, everyone knows this. He did the first 2 debut episodes, episode 8 and episode 10 of Season 2. So he did the beginning, the finale, and one leading to the finale.
Damn.
Of Season 2. And then he did episode 6 of Season 7, which was the one right before the finale. So that's is that the one with the ice dragon? Is that the... I don't remember. Baelish isn't dead yet. That's all I remember. But he's done actually, like, really good episodes of Game of Thrones. That's what's really upsetting about this, right? He's also done several episodes of The Sopranos. It was predominantly in Season 6, but he did a couple here and there. He also directed The Many Saints of Newark.
Which was not well received, apparently.
No. He also directed Terminator Genesis. And
also not received.
No, and he also did, like, a bunch of other, like, TV shows for HBO, like Sex and the City. Well, I mean, not, like, the whole show, but filmed episodes of stuff. So, like, Sex and the City, Rome, in the good season, not the bad season.
Oh, the first season of Rome?
Mm-hmm. Just, like, a bunch of miscellaneous stuff like that. It's predominantly TV versus films. Like, he's done some films, but not a ton. But ironically, Taylor is also not the only person attached to Game of Thrones that we'll see in the production of The Dark World. At all. There are many, many other people.
It's Beyond the Wall. It's when they go on that crazy mission beyond the wall to get, to grab one of the White Walkers.
Yeah, okay, this is the one I was thinking of. Okay, got it. So, on paper, Thor the Dark World gives its story credits to Don Payne, who also wrote Thor, and Robert Rodat, who wrote Saving Private Ryan and The Patriot, among other things.
Wow.
And the screenwriting credits go to Christopher Yost and Marcus McFeely, who we've covered at length. Because they did Captain America, they did a bunch of Agent Carter stuff. They've done a lot of MCU stuff by this point. However, this large amount of writing credits illustrates a bit of a troubled creative production. Not only had several people left over creative differences to this point, but McFeely also said that so many writers had contributed to the script that he was uncertain who the credit would even go to. And that was in Slash Film in 2013.
Yeah, that's definitely a too many cooks in the kitchen approach.
It gets worse. More concerning yet is Taylor's admission that he and Marvel brought in someone else to rewrite several scenes that were not working out in filming that were then rewritten on location by none other than Joss Whedon.
God damn it.
And this was because he was still working on Age of Ultron, and their idea there was that they wanted him to come in and make sure that things actually synced up with the upcoming Avengers movie, in theory. In theory.
God, I hate... all this does is getting into the nitty-gritty of the writing and everything. All it really does is just show how much influence Joss Whedon had over this fucking shit. And
he absolutely did at the time.
And points exactly to what a lot of the stuff we ended up hating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Taylor's sitting here saying that they're filming scenes that are not working while they're filming them. First off, that's a concern to me, because he is the second official director they've had attached to this, and even he's having problems filming some of the stuff the way that it's been written. And the other director left because she had a different story in mind that was still similar to the one being told here.
Yeah.
And he's saying that they literally flew Joss Whedon in to give them tips on the scenes that weren't working for them. And then he like, gave his tips on the one scene, and then Alan was like, well, but what about this one and this one? Because we're having trouble with those two. And then he just rewrites them and then leaves again.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, this is actually separate from several Loki scenes that were filmed after the rest of the movie and added once the character storyline was massively changed from their initial intention there as well. These are separate things, but they also, like, the movie, a lot of people rumored that it was going into reshoots, but it's actually additional footage that didn't exist. It's not reshoots, it's new shoots.
Yeah.
So, Whedon is, according to Slash Film in that same 2013 article, responsible for Loki and Thor's discussion on the skiff in Svartalfheim. Despite my love of Trust My Rage as the great, like, sync, like, the end to that conversation, you can kind of tell that a lot of that is Whedon's really up and down writing with the Asgardians, because their voice tone, like, it's not even, like, the tone delivery, because that's fine, but, like, the words they're using, like, shifts from how the rest of the movie had been written.
Yes.
And parts of it get really weird because they have just, like, this horrible tension that hadn't already been there.
Yeah.
Which some of it I understand, but it had been really funny up to that point, and then suddenly, like, they're screaming at each other.
And suddenly they're really angry and
yeah, it's really wild to me. But yeah, Whedon is responsible for that scene, and he's also responsible for, quote, an emotional scene between Thor and Jane, though it's not specified which it is, and Alan Taylor said that it wasn't a comedic scene, so I don't know if this is something that still exists in the movie. I don't know if this is that horrible grief line that Eric throws at Thor when he gets back to Earth. Like, is Loki with you? Loki's dead. Thank God. Like, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, oof, it's so mean.
I really laughed hard, though.
It's so mean, but I don't know.
Like, yes, it's mean, but at the same time, you're like...
Yeah, we don't know. There aren't a lot of emotional single scenes between Jane and Thor. There really aren't.
There really aren't. For this supposed to be, like, a follow-up on their love and romance, like, it
we
does
really
not...
we really don't get a lot that
No.
isn't, like, a weird comedic lead-in to another plot line. So I don't know if this is something that's in the film in theory, or something they ended up cutting out that should have been in the movie anyway, because I've seen all the deleted scenes for this film, even the ones they didn't include on the Blu-ray, and they all should have been in the movie.
Meanwhile, in What If, Thor and Jane literally bang in Las Vegas.
Meanwhile, we could have cut out 90% of the Darcy and Ian crap, and this still would have been a better movie.
I mean, she clearly had better chemistry with Howard the Duck in What If.
She had better chemistry with Fandral in the first movie, too. And
Like,
that's like a throwaway meeting that happens right at the end before everyone goes home. Anyway, so you have Whedon coming in, you have all these writers, you have so many writers on this that nobody's sure who's even going to get the credit for it. It's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Very
and then,
much so.
Additionally, the mid-credit scene featuring the first appearance of the Collector, who we'll cover with Guardians of the Galaxy, was actually directed by James Gunn.
And that explains why you know it's good.
It also explains why it looks like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes.
Thor the Dark World was initially intended, furthermore, to be the final piece of what was internally called the Loki trilogy. Meaning Loki was actually supposed to for real die in this film. However, this didn't test well with audiences who didn't believe it.
Oh.
Because why would they? And the ending regarding Loki was rewritten, and that's why they added a bunch of all these, like, extra Loki scenes in there to give context to him suddenly not being dead. Basically. So, getting to the summary of Thor the Dark World. Ages prior to the current year of 2013, Odin's father, Bor, defeated the Dark Elf Malekith during a rare, reoccurring event called the Convergence. With the boundaries between space all but obliterated for a short moment, Malekith seeks to inflict eternal night on the universe with the power of a mysterious substance called the Ether. What this eternal night means, I don't know. How the Ether is an infinity stone, I still don't know because we're never shown it as a stone. whatever.
No, it's just a big, like, liquidy blob.
Yes. However, he's defeated, the realm of Svartalfheim falls into ruin, the Dark Elves are thrust into near extinction, and the ether is hidden from Malekith as the Convergence passes. Buried so deep that no one will find it. Sure.
Literally above ground.
Sure. So, enter 2013. The Convergence is almost upon us once again, and Thor is working to bring peace back to the beleaguered 9 realms, or 8, I guess, because Svartalfheim is really honestly shown to be barren and no one lives there, so I don't know.
On top of just being incredibly fugly to look at.
It's awful. Each thrown into chaos with warlords and marauders taking advantage of the chaos Loki started back on Earth in 2012. Because everyone was so focused on Earth that everyone's basically taking advantage of all that focus being on Earth.
Yep.
If we'd explained that this is what Odin's beef with Earth was, this would make much more sense, but we don't.
I would have.
Fine. So, Loki is brought before his father, who throws him into prison for his crimes, see the Avengers, and Thor is kept away from Earth and the one person waiting for him. Meanwhile, Jane has been dealing with 2 years of Thor being missing, which is apparently not counting New York, trying dating and feeling disconnected with her from her scientific pursuits while in London, which is apparently where her parents live. However, Darcy interrupts an awkward date, showing Jane odd readings they picked up that look similar to those that had brought Thor to New Mexico. So Jane ditches the date, and they, along with Darcy's new intern Ian, go to investigate the anomaly. They stumble on an old warehouse that exhibits some odd physics. You see floating vehicles, disappearing and reappearing objects, and most puzzling of all, a large stone structure with an ominous presence. It's like, very video gaming of them.
It's also a glitch in the Matrix, basically.
Yes. Not knowing what she stumbled into, Jane is basically infected with the power of the ether, which is kind of using her like a host.
Mm-hmm.
Pulling her out of Darcy's sight and that of Heimdall back in Asgard. Alarmed, Thor breaks from his duty and travels to London to find Jane, who has emerged from her contact with the ether missing 6 hours, and loaded with powers as the substance in her defends itself from outside interference. Worry spiking, Thor takes Jane back with him to Asgard to have this investigated.
I thought Darcy said she'd been missing for 5 hours.
I think she said... Anyway, it was several hours. I'm pretty sure it was 6, but it's several hours, doesn't matter. Several hours when she thought it was maybe 5 minutes maximum.
Okay.
Is really the important part there. So initially cold, Odin reluctantly accepts that Jane should be kept safe with them due to the volatile substance Malekith still searches for, especially due to the upcoming Convergence. Why he doesn't see the sense in this and Thor has to basically bully him into it, I still don't understand. Odin's logic does not make any sense in this film whatsoever.
No.
Because it isn't logic.
No, he comes off incredibly stupid.
Really dumb and really prejudiced, and I only understand it in the context of what happens later in the film. Whatever. So, unfortunately, Jane's presence is exactly what draws Malekith and his remaining Dark Elves to Asgard. Loki, in a huff after a fight with his mother in prison, directs one of the prison intruders from Malekith to the upper levels of the palace. Unknowingly, however, this leads to his mother's death as she fights to protect Jane from Malekith, because this movie does a absolutely reprehensible amount of damseling Jane Foster.
Yeah, and then having the nerve to
Frigga, right, in the same breath.
Yeah.
Amazing. The Malekith is driven away by Thor, who uses Mjolnir to electrocute and burn half his face, giving him the visage that we know from the comic books, where half of his face is dark and half of it is light. It's very DC Two-Face of them.
Mm-hmm.
Not as fun.
Not as fun.
But, I mean, he is in the comics. He's not in this movie, though. He's very dry in this movie.
He barely has a character in this movie.
It's very true, unfortunately. He is of the Marvel fate, or Marvel crew of, forgettable bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately. A funeral is held for Frigga, but in his grief, Odin becomes even more angry and vengeful, basically wanting to keep Jane on Asgard to draw Malekith back. An attitude that Thor worries spells doom for Asgard. Why bring him back when it's just going to end up with more people dead versus taking the fight to Malekith? We don't know.
Makes no
but
sense.
at this point, when Odin is, like, sick with grief, I understand the stupidity. But it's the only point in the movie where I understand the stupidity.
Yeah, because he's being angry and emotional in a way that, he kept always lecturing his sons not to be.
Yeah, because he's at least grieving at this point, which makes more sense to me. But unfortunately, the rest of the script also feels like he's just as angry and bitter and stiff and pissy at his kids. And I just... This is the epitome of Odin is a bad dad. And he's not even a bad dad in, like, the other movies. You could kind of argue it in the first one, maybe, a little bit, because he makes some questionable choices.
No, he seemed a far better father that actually cared about his family.
Yeah, he still cares about people in the first and the third movies. He does not in this one.
I would argue that Odin sleep just made him more cranky.
Honestly, if this is what we're led to see Odin as later, yes. Yes, I would also concur with that. So instead, Thor decides to go to Malekith instead of luring him back to Asgard by enlisting his friends to help him break Loki out of prison, as Loki is the only person in Asgard who knows how to leave by alternative means to the Bifrost. After crime caper shenanigans, honestly, should have been the whole movie.
It really should have been the whole movie. It was one of the best things about this movie.
Loki does indeed lead himself, Thor, and Jane to Svartalfheim, aka the Dark World. Title drop.
I mean, it's dark enough with its gross color palette.
It's all green and orange and mostly green and just dark.
Barely.
And it's gray washed and it's hideous.
It's not even a good green. It's a nasty looking green.
Well, and then you get to London and everything's gray
and bluish, and it's
I guess we won't get to this in cinematography. I'm going to interrupt now while I'm thinking about it, but this is basically the Man of Steel for the MCU.
Yeah.
That's what
it just sucks so much color out of it.
Oh, God. Oh, I'm in pain. I am in
It's just...
pain.
It's not... There are some moments where some things look okay, and there is a lot of potential there for a lot of cool shots, but it just never really seems to reach that potential, and it just comes off looking very ugly and sour and drained of color in a way that a lot of the other movies, even the house style movies, don't really
quite look like. Yeah, like this is really like the singular worst looking, I'd honestly argue, movie in the MCU. Whether or not you want to compare it to the TV shows or whatever, that's a whole different ballgame. But movies, specifically, just the way that they're filmed, yeah, it's not good.
Because there are scenes that are almost too dark. The ones that have more light still look very washed out.
It's the gray wash on everything. It looks like a DC movie.
Yeah, the color palette in this movie is just so bleak, and it's depressing, and it's ugly.
It makes the movie more depressing just by virtue of that alone.
There's a way of making something darker and grittier, like Daredevil, without making it horrendously depressing to look at.
Yeah. So I'm going to skip ahead to cinematography since we're already talking about it, and then I'll get to acting in a minute. But the cinematographer for Thor the Dark World is Kramer Morgenthau, who also did work with Alan Taylor on Terminator Genesis, The Many Saints of Newark, and the first 2 episodes of Season 2 of Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. He's also done Havoc, Fracture, Godsend, and there are a bunch of, movies I've vaguely heard of, but they look a lot like big-budget Lifetime movies, especially The Big Brass Ring. I feel like you'd really like that because you're very into your big-budget Lifetime movies. But really, when you have a dude who's making Thor, and his work is mainly The Sopranos, Game of Thrones,
and a
Terminator.
Not only Terminator, but a Terminator movie that no one liked.
Bad Terminator movie, and then some big budget Lifetime flicks.
Doesn't spell very good.
There's a reason it looks the way it does.
No, I love me
And I liked the opening of season 2 of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called going to Game of Thrones here to the point of parodying Game of Thrones, and that is where we hit with this movie.
And I love me some Lifetime movies from the 90s and 80s. I know you do. I love big budget Lifetime movies because they're just so ridiculous and stupid.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of these movies, Fracture, even has Anthony Hopkins in it.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that one. But it's like, there's a difference between me knowing what I'm getting with something that's like a Lifetime movie, and I can accept it for what it is, versus
making it a Marvel movie where we expect them to look a certain way.
Well, I expect it to look a certain way, I expect it to just, I don't know, I'm very lenient with comic book movies, but once you've shown me that you can do a really good comic book movie, I am going to judge all the other movies based on that standard. Yeah. And if you cannot hold up to that standard, then yeah, I'm going to be disappointed, and I'm going to be like, why did you drop the ball so hard on this?
I'm going to say a thing, and it might be unpopular here, but X-Men Origins Wolverine looked better than this. There was more color in it.
It did, to be honest.
And it had some weird shots. The CGI did not hold up as well as this one does. Rough. Because I don't know how you make a Thor movie this depressing. That's really what's upsetting about it, is Thor should not just be this depressing. Even when, like, in the third one, we have some truly depressing shit in the third movie.
We have some
It
sad
doesn't
stuff.
feel like this. At all. Like, I'm so frustrated. Anyway, so the movie also moves the setting from New Mexico to London. Theoretically, it's because Jane's parents live here, but there's little reason given for this otherwise. The only thing I can think of, and it's a clever connection, and I may be giving them too much credit for this, is that they set this in Greenwich, which is the home of the default time zone, GMT.
I think one of those many writers that was involved in this
may have had the idea.
did.
Yeah, like if you're going to have the convergence of all these spaces in this very specific time, doing it in the home of the default time zone is actually kind of clever, but it's about the most clever thing about this movie.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because all the good stuff is in the deleted scenes. Or with Hogan on Vanaheim when we only see him for like 0.25 seconds. He's a glorified cameo.
Pretty much. Which, again, you have so much potential to show all these different worlds, and we never really get to see them.
We never get to see the other worlds. Like, we could have had something that was bordering on what we see in the Multiverse of Madness trailer. Maybe you're not hopping through the multiverse, but you're hopping through different planets.
Different
They
realms.
should have looked different. They didn't. Most of them are barren, and this is the biggest difference between the Dark Elf world, the Dark World, and Jotunheim. Is Jotunheim, you could specifically see the ruins of the civilization that used to be there.
And the lighting was better, too.
You could also see how people were still kind of living there, which isn't necessarily the case for the Dark World, but at the same time, like, we never see a Dark World that shows us any reason why Malekith does what he does, why he's fighting for whatever he's fighting for. Like, we see nothing about these dark elves. They contextualize nothing.
Even in the beginning when we're seeing this fight, I didn't remember seeing a single building or home,
it's all rubble.
Nothing.
It's all the same rubble that we see at the end of the movie. It doesn't make any sense.
There's nothing there. It looks as barren as it did at the beginning, when you could have taken that cold open with the prologue. You could have shown how their world looked. You could have shown even a throwaway line of Malekith's motivation. Something. Show us what that world was like, and then show the war and how it was decimated.
Yeah. Also, did you waste all of your CGI on that fight? Or all your budget on the CGI for that fight at the beginning? Because there are also, like, next to no extras anywhere but in Asgard. which we barely see any of.
And Asgardian soldiers come out of the beam like Naruto running.
Yeah, like you'll see a lot of people in Asgard, but London, there are not enough people for me to buy that that's London.
No.
Are you kidding? Greenwich I kind of get because they're trying to evacuate the university or wherever it is that
you don't have
the fight is at.
You really don't have a lot of extras.
No, I mean, like, you kind of see some people on the subway, but that's the most populated London looks in the entire film.
We saw more extras in Skyfall, London,
Yeah.
than this.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like London. So London looks barren and depressing. The Dark World is just empty from start to finish.
Yeah.
And
Like, there's not a hint of what that civilization was actually like, so how the hell am I supposed to care or feel anything for these Dark Elves when I literally don't know anything about them, except for their weird pointy ships and their weird alien masks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's nothing there.
Yeah, I don't get it. And then we see Asgard, but we don't see enough of it, and you can't tell me this is the heart of Asgard when you gutted all of the scenes that actually showed us any of that.
Yeah, because we see basically almost the same amount that we saw in the first movie. You'd never really expand on Asgard at all.
No. Now, see, if we'd cut out, say, half of the time we spent on Darcy and Ian and given it to, like, say, the Warriors 3.
Or Thor and Jane in
general. Anything of Asgard that wasn't just Odin being mean.
Being a dick. Sure.
It would have been so much better.
I think
Which
it
is
would
why
have
I get
been.
so mad, because that's what all the deleted scenes are. It's all the stuff that they cut out of Asgard. It's irritating because they Jar Jar Binks Darcy. They used her to absolute excess, and this is where I just get so tired of Darcy.
Yeah, she was fine in the first movie because she was very limited, and...
Or at least when she was on screen, it wasn't just constant, haha, I'm the wacky one.
No, like, the comedy in the first one landed a lot better.
They manic pixie dream girled her in this movie, and I really hate it. So...
Yeah, you can't call it the heart of Asgard when you literally don't show
anything of it. Yeah, I'm still irritated by this.
Yeah, we saw an Asgardian funeral, okay? That does not constitute the heart of Asgard.
Not even a little bit. So, in terms of cast and acting, The Dark World brings back Hemsworth, Portman, Hiddleston, Rene Russo, Anthony Hopkins, Idris Elba, Jamie Alexander, Ray Stevenson, Stellan Skarsgård, the wrong Skarsgård.
Alexander is his son.
It's his son, the wrong Skarsgård, and Kat Dennings. We're also introduced to Christopher Eccleston as Malekith. I am going to butcher this in advance, and I have tried.
Holy crap.
I have tried to practice this, so if I say this wrong, I apologize, but I'm trying. So, Adewale Akintoye Agbaje.
I think that's probably as good as we're gonna get it with how white we are.
I am very sorry if that just absolutely butchered it. I already can't pronounce things, and we've gone over this a lot.
I mean, it looks...
I tried.
Seeing it written out, it is a tongue twister, but hopefully, I think...
Agbaje. Yeah, I think that's how you say that. As Malekith's Lieutenant Algrim, who also becomes Curse.
He literally... I don't even remember hearing that much or seeing that much of him in the movie. I mean, I appreciate them...
Yeah, he's the dude that goes and blows up the prison.
I mean, I appreciate, them having, a black elf there.
It also should have been a lot gayer. I said it. You're welcome.
I appreciate them having a black elf, but also... proves that, not all elves need to be white. Guys who want to, bitch about Lord of the Rings.
Right. Fuck. Then we also have Zachary Levi as the rightful Fandral.
Oh my god.
Thank you very much. He was supposed to be Fandral in the first movie and couldn't do it because of Chuck. And then Josh Dallas couldn't return to this movie because of Once Upon a Time. And we got the Fandral that we rightly deserved from the fucking beginning. Thank you.
Okay, see.
He's my boy.
For anyone who doesn't know, she has a really big bias, and...
I do, and I don't care.
She flies that flag for Fandral in a way that I don't think anyone else really does.
No, because I cosplayed Fandral once, met Zachary Levi at a convention, and blew his mind because who the fuck cosplays this? No one. Me. I know, do that.
I'm looking at the picture.
One girl in Canada and maybe that other chick in Germany, and I think that's it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture right now, and he was very pleased by that.
He was extremely psyched. It was really funny. Anyway, so, like, this was my goal for that costume, and I made that costume when the movie came out. I did not meet Zach Levi until 2019.
And then you got to live your dream.
It took 6 years for me to live my dream, but I finally did it. And then you have Jonathan Howard as Ian, who unfortunately had to follow my tirade on Zach Levi. The film also offers a hefty number of cameos, including Asano as Hogan. Due to his minimized role, I counted as a cameo because he's barely in it. Mm-hmm. You also have Stan Lee, who is a patient along with Eric in the psych ward.
Yeah. Can I have my shoe back? Alice Krieg is Ear, so she... I think that's probably how you say that is She's like the main Asgardian nurse. So Alice Krieg, I know predominantly from Children of Dune. James McAvoy, please come collect your grandmother. Actually, I remember her mostly from that silent film movie where she plays that awful bitch that wants to burn everyone. We also saw her recently in that Gretel and Hansel. Yeah, she was the witch. Oh, mm-hmm. God, I loved her as the witch.
You're welcome.
I loved her in that, actually. She was, like, my favorite part in that movie.
Mm-hmm. And then we have, randomly, Tallulah Riley as a fellow nurse in Asgard.
Ooh,
Chris O'Dowd from the IT crowd as Jane's, date, quote-unquote, Richard.
Have you turned it on and off again?
I mean, he's basically the same guy.
He is.
Benicio del Toro in his introduction as the Collector. Tony Curran as Boar. He is Finn in Season 2 of Daredevil. I'll know who that is when we get to Season 2 of Daredevil. But that's who that is. That's who Boar is the dude from Daredevil.
No.
Clive Russell from Game of Thrones as Tyr. He's another one of those... I don't remember if he's like an Einherjar or if he's in that opening sequence, but that's the Blackfish.
Oh my god, the Blackfish!
Mm-hmm.
I love the Blackfish.
Then you have Richard Brake as like one of the Einherjar lieutenants. Richard Brake is the Night King from Game of Thrones.
Good.
And then you have Chris Evans. Surprise, Chris Evans is here, and it's the best part of the movie. Singularly the best part of the movie.
I want you to tell people your theory on Loki and Steve over here.
I think Loki has a thing for Steve, because Steve actually intellectually argues with him and has semantic, like, fights with him. It's not just... Tony's rude and punches him, or, you know, the Hulk just beats him into the ground or whatever. Steve will argue semantics with Loki, and he likes that.
He likes it a lot.
There's a reason why Loki chooses Steve to imitate.
But also...
Other than the fact that Chris Evans was probably the first one that they got in contact with.
But also, he has the same thing with Natasha when she not only sneaks up on him...
Yeah.
But literally tricks him.
Yeah, that's literally the crux of their, like, character interaction in the Avengers, aside from that awful phrasing and insult that I refuse to accept as canon in that film because it hurts me. Loki really likes it when people will intellectually argue with him. Mm-hmm. He's really into this. Thus, Steve is the one that he goes for. Because Steve, at the time, other than Nat, they're really the only ones, like, arguing with him. Mm-hmm. Right? So, that is my theory as to why Loki specifically singles out Steve to imitate in front of Thor.
Also, what is your theory with why Loki keeps dying all the time?
Oh, because he wants... It took me a minute to remember what I'd been talking about last night, but I think he keeps faking his deaths because he wants to see, up close, if people are going to care if he bites it or not. And I don't think I'm that far off, because, like, even in the Avengers, as much as again, writing, like, one of his key lines at Thor was like, "Did you even grieve?" Like, it was one of the first things he asks Thor. He hasn't seen Thor in, like, what, a year?
Yeah.
Yeah. His first thing is, "Did you even grieve?" Yeah, he cares. He cares about, like, and we see this, and we'll get into this with Ragnarok. I don't want to get too far into Ragnarok, but he also exemplifies this in Ragnarok real hard. With that and brings it back up. Yeah, he'll bring this back up. I don't really want to get too far into it ahead of us.
But
he has this propensity for, like, mythologizing himself.
Yes.
He
does. He is,
and
the
he
hero.
really wants to know if people are going to care about him if he bites it.
He's the hero of his own narrative. Really.
Yes. Well, I mean, he sacrifices himself to save Jane in this movie, and knowing what we know, that was originally intended to just be the end of Loki.
Which
so
is
I mean,
stupid.
he did get his hero moment. But I also agree with test audiences. I wouldn't have bought it for a single second.
Also,
I did buy it with, Infinity War, but again, we'll get to that later.
But also, that's just so stupid to take one of your most popular characters
and just ice him.
Yeah.
The irony.
But I do think you're right, because at the end of the movie, or near the end, when we see Loki take on the guise of that guard, which the green light gives it away.
Yeah, the
before we
Einhard
see the guard. And he goes and he tells,
Yeah, he wanted to see what Odin's specific reaction was to him telling him that his son was dead.
Yeah, because you could literally see the guard, like, look down and then look back up at Odin as he gives him this news.
He absolutely wanted to see what Odin's reaction would be.
And after seeing that, I think that's probably exactly what he does. Because that was a very telling scene. And I'm like,
extremely.
God damn, Loki.
Yeah, there are parts of this movie that work. And when they work, they really work. But unfortunately, most of the movie is not like those moments.
No. Again, it's like I've been describing with other movies. They're little chunks of gold in a giant turd.
Well,
that you can find sometimes.
I've already talked about Natalie Portman over Patty Jenkins.
Yes.
But I do have another note for you before we close out acting. Also in contention for Malekith, originally, was both Mads Mikkelsen and Benedict Cumberbatch.
I would have actually loved Mads Mikkelsen in that
He
role.
couldn't do it because of Hannibal.
Yeah.
I think they just didn't hire Benedict, which is fine. He makes a far superior Doctor Strange. But I find it funny that both the dudes that end up in Doctor Strange are the ones that were up for Christopher Eccleston's part.
They just needed a British dude.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. So, I'm not even going to go over soundtrack. We've already talked about Brian Tyler. We did that last episode with Iron Man. The only really notable parts of the score are the parts of Patrick Doyle's that they reuse because he composed the theme, and they kind of feel tonally dissonant to the Asgard that we're given.
Yeah, it doesn't even feel right. Like, I know they're reusing the same composition,
but it feels very out of place.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't even sound as good as when it was Patrick Doyle.
No, and that's really all I have to say about the music. It's serviceable, but it's not Patrick Doyle.
Like, you downgraded from Patrick fucking Doyle.
Pretty much. It's the same dude who did Iron Man 3. It's fine. I don't care that much about it. It's fine. So, overall rating for this film, out of 5. What would you give this movie?
Probably a 2, actually.
That's fair.
And I say that because, like I said, I'm only giving it a 2 because of these few character moments, like, especially between Thor and Loki. We get to see more of their relationship. Like, the whole back and forth when they were escaping in the ship was very funny.
Loki's, peak little brother annoyances.
And actually getting more personality for the Warriors 3, more than we've seen in, like, forever, it feels like.
At least they got characters. Sif did not. Sif got a downgrade, and that was really irritating.
Yeah, which, again, is one of the things that works against this movie, to have Sif suddenly be so hardcore into Thor, and I'm just like, that shouldn't be the whole of her goddamn character.
The Evangeline Lilied her from The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Shoved her into just like this random love triangle that really wasn't ever the focus of the first movie at all.
And it shouldn't be.
It's really rough. So in comparison, I still rate this movie at a 3. That extra star is still just for Zach Levi. I still love you, my dude. But I largely agree. There are parts of this that are really rough to sit back through.
Yes.
And try and make sense of, because the characters are extremely off or just missing.
Yeah, like some of them are
depending on whether or not it's Odin or Jane we're talking about.
Some of them are just incredibly out of character. Others, the writing, like with Sif, fails them majorly. And then there are some moments that are genuinely cool, like when... Yeah.
I really love that we gave Heimdall more of a character.
Yeah, he actually got a really cool action scene.
We gave the Warriors 2 more character.
Yes.
Let's be real. The third one is Sir not appearing in this film.
Pretty much.
I enjoyed what little of Asgard we do get to see, but this is also, again, me informed by the parts of this movie I've seen that were not in the movie that feel more like the movie to me than the movie. To be fair.
I really liked how we got to see Stellan Skarsgård run around naked.
I know you love that.
Continuing the Skarsgård tradition of being naked.
Yes. And I'm confusing him with Alexander because they both play a dude named Eric, and my brain just broke.
They really do, but also...
That's what happened.
I also liked, though, how ultimately it was Eric who ended up saving Jane and Thor this time around.
Yes, I did appreciate that.
Yeah.
Even though, again, like, Jane's constant damseling is irritating.
It would have been...
The ether makes absolutely no sense.
It does. It makes no sense. It would have made more sense for her to have, like, some sort of connection to it, and at the end, she's the one who faces off with Malekith because she knows the ether, she can feel
scientifically figure out what it is, which would have been really neat, but we get none of that. I'm only hoping that this is, and we talked about this a little bit, that we kind of use this as some kind of explanation for how she's Chick Thor now.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Or at least we get some kind of rational explanation for that. I don't really care how we get it, as long as we get, something that makes sense in the context of the movie.
But also just those images of seeing her jacked.
Right? I'm very into it.
Damn.
Damn, Natalie, you're a crazy bitch!
You're right, everyone's gonna suck my dick!
My favorite. So yeah, like, a lot more of my kindness toward this movie is really forgiving the potential that was there that isn't actually the final product.
Yeah.
The final product is actually still incredibly frustrating, and I understand this.
Yeah.
But like, I have a biased love in my heart for what this movie could have been and what I really wanted it to be.
Yeah, it had a lot of potential, especially with the portal scene. Like, there was so much potential, and they got really close to making it as cool as it could have been, but
you're thinking with portals.
They fell so short.
Yeah,
and it's
they did.
That's what this whole movie feels like.
The movie actually does deserve a 2. I'm just nice to it, and we know why.
Because you're biased.
Because I'm biased, and that's fine. And I can fully accept this, and I'm stating this now. I'm biased about this movie. I mean, all of film reviews are honestly just kind of biased in the first place. But yes, I'm really biased about this movie. This will not be my first or my last unpopular opinion.
But yeah, that's what this whole movie feels like, that it just fell short of the potential it actually had.
Yes, that's absolutely what this entire movie is. They were not, in fact, thinking with portals.
No, they were not.
So, thank you for listening to this episode of FANSPLAINED. If you enjoy what we do, consider donating on Ko-fi. Everything we make goes right back into the production quality of the show. We appreciate all of our subscribers and everything you do, and we're thankful for anything from Hulk smashing that like button to your questions and comments on each episode, and especially sharing the show with your friends. FANSPLAINED is typically a weekly media criticism and deep dive podcast, and we are currently still working our way through the chronological order of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Later this week, we'll also be doing a reaction to the second episode of Moon Knight, as it is released on Disney+. The though again, this is in a much more condensed way, at least until we cover it in the chronology.
Yeah, it's not going to be a deep dive, it's just going to be a reaction, more or less.
Yeah. So next week, we'll also be tackling Captain America, the Winter Soldier, aka the first good movie of Phase 2.
And one of the best Marvel movies in the whole MCU. I love this movie.
We'll have an entire episode for us to just go on and on and on about how much we love the Winter Soldier.
It's so good, fuck.
So you can find our updates here on YouTube as well as on Twitter and Coffee at FANSPLAINED. If you want more of our conversations on the MCU and other fandoms, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for new episode notifications. So until next time, Salt Shakers, this has been Ryan.
And Em.
With the FANSPLAINED podcast. And we'll see you next week.